Hey guys, it's the Melblade 5. In February 2021, a day I had long hoped would come to pass finally did. I've been waiting for this over what felt like an eternity, despite having to wait similar lengths of time for other games in the past. But it happened, and I got to experience it in full. I'm just drawing this out so it syncs up with the intro. Persona 5 Strikers came out! When this game was initially announced in Japan as Persona 5 Scramble, which I first misread as Scrabble, I was quite excited for it, unlike everyone else at first, due to the fair amount of enjoyment I got out of previous Musou games I played, but expected to follow that same general format just with Persona 5's cast and some mechanics, which was pretty good for me already. But then the second Japanese trailer came out where it revealed that, in terms of everything aside from gameplay, it's basically a Persona 5 2, which then made me go, "Yes! Come to Papa!" I played right into Atlus's slow localization hands as they placed my desire to see the Phantom Thieves again and their story to continue behind a language barrier. At that point, and especially upon catching wind of people posting stuff from the Japanese Switch version, I actively avoided everything related to this game so that stupid YouTube recommendations won't give me any spoilers, in the hopes that it would eventually get released in English. But over time, my hopes dwindled as we went even longer than what the other spin-offs in Royal took to be confirmed in English with no word at all. That was until came another moment where I accidentally predicted the future. And Scramble because I'm waiting for a hopeful English release before playing it.
1 week later.
Showtime! An English version was at long last announced, now being called Strikers, which I think is a way better name, and that excitement I lost over the wait came back in full force as it was now the complete opposite of how I behaved with the Japanese version. I watched every single English trailer and promotional stuff that Atlus put out to satiate my anticipation. And a year after it released in Japan, and playing through an entire other Musou game with Age of Calamity, which I also considered making a video on but couldn't think of much to say, I got the PS4 version of Strikers, since, save for Q2, all my Persona experience has been on this console, so I wasn't about to stop now. And I finished the game in about a month. So here was my overall experience and thoughts on Strikers that will obviously go over spoilers for both this game and Persona 5 in general, so turn back now otherwise. So after witnessing my long-anticipated reunion of the group alongside all the familiar settings of Tokyo that made me so glad to be back, the new gets quickly introduced too with the app Emma, who is just Siri. Literally. As well as functioning as a new meta-nav. This time taking the thieves into jails, which are pretty much palaces but with some different rules. Namely for the ruler, or monarch in this case, to steal people's desires and change their hearts to do what they want. Like Alice turning old men into simps. And it's all still somehow in the metaverse, even though the metaverse got erased at the end of 5, so how is it still here? It left me very confused at first, and it's kind of a big plot hole that never gets explained. But regardless, the goals ultimately remain the same, and that was very much reflected in the gameplay to my surprise. Up until just before the game came out, I was expecting this to be your standard Musou gameplay of having maps with hundreds of enemies from the get-go, keeps and outposts you have to conquer and protect, and the occasional boss or surprise objective thrown in, just with some Persona mechanics added on. But instead, it leans way more towards the Persona side with its approach. For all intents and purposes, navigating jails is exactly like palace exploration. You walk and sneak around to reach your next destination, solve a puzzle here and there, and ideally avoid raising the security level and ambushing the shadows. It's only the combat where the Musou gameplay takes center stage whilst having the Persona skills and affinities to flesh it out. While I did have a slight concern that battles would quickly become boring with them being far smaller in scope and seemingly quick to win upon learning of this approach, I fortunately did not feel that way when I actually played it myself. While many of the standard enemy battles can be won in no time at all with a decent party and the right personas on Joker, there are also plenty of tougher enemy encounters and large-scale fights in prison keeps and hack battles to keep it interesting. And I don't know about you, but I actually found quite a few of the bosses in this game hard. Whereas it was more the opposite in 5, where I felt most bosses weren't super hard if you knew what you were doing. Maybe I still wasn't quite used to the gameplay, or maybe they really are a lot more aggressive. I'm not sure, but for some reason, I only had this kind of initial trouble with the earlier bosses. It's like the one game where I felt the bosses get overall easier on normal difficulty as you progress. And many of these bosses are also very weird. We've got a stripper rabbit, a JoJo posing dragon, yo mama so fat she got a second mouth.
You're comparing yourself to me? Ha! You're not even good enough to be my fake.
I'll make you eat those words!
I wish you got to face all the fake thieves though. And on the subject of thieves, they're all so much fun to play as. This is the first Musou game where I find every playable character enjoyable to use. Whilst both Hyrule Warriors games and Fire Emblem Warriors didn't quite reach that achievement, there are some who I personally prefer to use over others, but despite their noticeable differences in playstyle and unique skills, they all have some incredibly enjoyable moves to execute on swarms of enemies and bosses. So much so that I ended up getting every master art for all of them, which I also didn't think was very hard to achieve, which just expanded their capabilities. I think Ann's Crocodile Tears was the one I used the most because it's so helpful for stronger enemies. And oh my god, Yusuke is Virgil! Now we just need him to say, I'm motivated. Even Sophia I found fun to play when I initially thought she'd be weaker in terms of attack power, and her gimmick being based on timing made me wince. But the timing is very forgiving, and her yo-yo's attack coverage makes up for any other shortcomings they may have. So in the end, it made me trying to keep everyone the same level whilst inadvertently following the same approach I do in 5 of using one team throughout the whole palace or section of one based on the enemy weaknesses. Not as much of a chore as it sounds, but I still would have really wished for a Moon Confidant equivalent to not worry about this. There's not even a bond skill for this, whilst one of the first ones I prioritized in my playthrough was Oracle Recovery, since I had a similar experience to my first time playing through Kamoshida's Palace of running low on SP and having to leave throughout a bunch of this game, only to find that it's fucking worthless! However, on the upside, one thing I was excited for across the entire wait for this game was getting the sick Musou electric guitar remixes of Persona 5 music.
You never see it coming.
The only songs in the soundtrack that I personally didn't care for were honestly the 2 original regular battle themes. I guess only getting to hear the first 10 seconds for most fights didn't help, but I felt they were lacking the oomph and catchiness of all other Lin vocal tracks. But everything else is a bop. Oh, and I almost forgot about the Velvet Room, because, to be honest, I didn't use it that much. The main reason being how weird many of the fusion materials are in this game. Since this game isn't as long as 5 or Royal, there obviously isn't as big of a compendium this time around, though it's still decently sizable. But that in turn made a number of fusions weird when attempting to fill in the gaps left by absent personas. Obviously, each one has multiple fusion options to create it, but many of them required using the persona from way earlier in the game and at an absurdly high level for them, where you'll either have to do hours of grinding or spend hundreds of thousands of persona points with the new level up feature to get them to that level. And for the latter, I never came remotely close to that amount despite not using them that much either. Most of the time when going into the Velvet Room, I didn't meet the requirements needed for a fusion, so all I could do was just leave, which then led me to not bothering half the time. The only time I really did focus on it was with the requests much later on to defeat the really strong personas so you could fuse them afterward, which I did with several of them like Seth, but that was about it. And speaking of requests, I wanted to mention how the only party member request I couldn't do was Ryuji's in Sapporo because of some kind of glitch. When receiving the request from the doctor as part of the quest, it wouldn't appear anywhere in the request menu, even after resetting multiple times. Therefore, I couldn't accept the request to actually do it, thus preventing me from completing it, which prevented me from completing Ryuji's quest because of something that wasn't my fault. Other than that, I did every single request I got during the main story. I guess it's somewhat fitting that Ryuji's the only one who didn't get what he wanted. Maybe that's why he says fuck. After changing Alice's heart and having to take the deal with Zenkichi to take out jails all across Japan, reaching the Sendai jail and its storyline made me start to notice my one big criticism with this game. There are parts of the story that are just copied over from 5 in sequel, trilogy, or Miles Morales fashion, both with the story as a whole and the characterization of some of the monarchs. This was first apparent with Natsume essentially being a more sympathetic and less evil Madarame, given that he plagiarizes work and lies to the public for monetary gain and success, and the jail storyline heavily focusing on Yusuke further backs this up. Then I noticed this more at later points. Not only does this suffer from the obvious point of feeling like a rehash, but it also left me feeling a little disappointed because of some missed potential. What made me love the idea of the metaverse when I first played 5 was how they executed its concept. This world based around humanity's cognition, and with palaces and jails being how a person views the real world given physical form, and all the great symbolism that could fit into it. There's so much potential for what you could do with that idea, and namely the kinds of antagonists you can make out of it. So it really bummed me out to see them apparently feeling the need to copy some stuff from before. Cause I really like what they do when it's something completely original, like with Hyodo's jail and especially Ubukata's, where we get thrown into Resident Evil and the idea of him being dead and how that affects the jail. And I also like how they made most of the monarchs sympathetic through the trauma cells, showing how they were good people who were treated cruelly, which then led to them becoming corrupted, mainly upon gaining the power to change hearts. So I do genuinely love it when I see them doing unique things in this game. I just wish it could have been more like that throughout the whole story. Since otherwise, it did make me think I might as well be playing a Musou reimagining of Persona 5 rather than a sequel story on occasion. To a lesser degree, it also made some parts of the story predictable by simply recalling what happened in 5, on top of a few bits that I found predictable in general. Like from the get-go, I was confident that the ones behind the jails was Medice, since they own Emma. We're even getting a scene with the CEO, Akira Konoe, so it's like they're What?! Why does he look like the guy from the Mafia City ads? Some parts of his past criminal life must have been reignited here since my prediction was right! He is a villain and the one responsible for the jails and monarchs appearing, and now the Phantom Thieves have been framed for murder. Cause that's never been done before. And then he turns Akane into a monarch too, where I like the theme of her jail, and how her shadow has her own makeshift Phantom Thief attire, but her distorted desires are a result of her pain and sadness from her mum getting killed by a corrupt politician. Which is the same thing we went through with Futaba, minus blaming herself. I don't mean or want to keep beating a dead horse here. Wait, that was a bad choice of words. Now that it's up to Zenkichi to rescue the others from his daughter's clutches, and as I laugh my ass off over the sight of him having to jog over to each hiding spot, I had the recurring thought, I think I know where this is going. Oh, I think I know where this is going.
Do you finally see the truth?
This is going where I think it's going.
Fine. Seal the contract.
Zenkichi is a party member, and a very cool one at that. All the way back when I saw the early Japanese trailers for the game, I got the impression that he was going to be more of an antagonistic figure to the thieves, which slightly carried over to some of his early game cutscenes too. Well, if they hadn't given this away in the game's cover and opening. But as I played the game, I liked him more and more, mainly due to his comedic dorkiness from being the odd one out as the only adult, and his gradually growing rapport with the thieves. Then it all paid off of his awakening, where I now really like him because of it including all the themes and symbolism I love about most of the other awakenings. Zenkichi recognizes his own shortcomings and how he previously refused to stand up for his own beliefs. No longer wishing to be a sycophant, he breaks out of the metaphorical chains binding him and rebels to fight for his own sense of justice. And he's got the most badass reasoning behind his codename out of any party member. Though I kinda wish his codename was just Gramps as a joke. Plus, he's really fun to play as. His attacks have a lot of range and can drain health, and his Fury trait lets him get stronger and gain even more range to become as reckless as Haru behind the wheel, but at the cost of damaging himself, which almost got me killed in his awakening battle. I also like how interesting Valjean is as a persona by being very different from all the others I've encountered thus far, specializing in almighty attacks and all the stat boosting skills. And looking up his origin showed me just how much he parallels with Zenkichi's character whilst also fitting the rebel theme of the others. So other than that, I'll just put up this image and move on. After saving Akane and the others letting Zenkichi think she was dead for a second there, dick move! We move on to Osaka to take the fight to Konoe himself. Osaka is definitely my favorite of all the cities because almost every shop sells some of the best items and ingredients in the whole game, especially the crab for making the hot pot and sushi. It's the one place where I spent a couple of minutes buying shit from many places every time I left a jail. And combined with Sophia's shop was the reason why I was dirt poor in this game compared to the last 2 times. I needed all those amazing items because Konoe's jail is very hard at some points. Namely the battle for the first prison keep, which went on for an eternity and nearly killed me, and the 2 battles against 4 that I was mostly unprepared for. It was very long too, and when Lavenza's requests to defeat the really powerful personas came up, that acted as a diversion of my time and items both during the infiltration and afterwards. As for Konoe, I continue to successfully predict his entire character, as upon it being mentioned that his dad was murdered when he was a kid and he survived by hiding, I immediately thought, he killed his dad, didn't he? And called it. As well as predicting his shadow taking the form of Zephyr Man to become Tony Stark. And then he gets a mech! I honestly found this battle nowhere near as hard as some of the aforementioned enemy fights, but seeing as how he's kinda the Shido of this game, I figured he'd have a second phase. Akira the hero. So, Joker in the manga. While it was more challenging than the mech, I still didn't think it was really that hard as long as you dodge accordingly. His only attack I found to be potentially devastating was his multiple sword swings in quick succession. But I used Makoto in this fight for healing purposes, so I could just get back all the damage he dealt. But following Konoe's defeat and subsequent change of hearts, I knew it wasn't over despite how final they made it sound. It's just too quick and nice for a wrap-up, and there are still some unanswered questions, namely Sophia's past.
All this time, I've had the same query. What is the difference between you all and Konoe?
You just said to him what the difference is! What the fuck are you talking about? I didn't know AIs could have short-term memory loss. With Emma operating independently, there's now one more target left at- Whoa, wait, what? Memento's deaths? And on the slightly less surprising side... So Ichinose was the one truly behind all this. I mean, I did find her to be very weird and shifty upon meeting her with that unrealistically happy demeanor and learning our identities, but I didn't think it would lead to something of this extent. Turns out she doesn't really show any true emotions, which made everybody around her think of her as a heartless doll, which then manifested into a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy after attempting to challenge this label by creating Sophia as a prototype of Emma, which was something else I predicted since they're both AI. She then threw a hissy fit over Sophia not understanding the heart, given she was just born, discarded her, and then made Emma as an emotionless AI to grant humanity's ultimate desire, which is once again for complete control and security at the cost of free will. And now she's aiding Emma to achieve that goal. I don't have an issue with her backstory, but I think it suffers from being presented in an overly generalized way rather than explicitly stating or showing why her past treatment has caused her to go to this length. It comes across like, people think I'm weird, so I'm going to erase all of humanity's freedom! And as Sophia tries to fight off Ichinose's override sequence, I got fully surprised again.
Can you wield that strength?
What?! Sophia's getting an actual persona?!
My name is...
The possibility of this never once crossed my mind, so it completely caught me off guard. The girl who came from a box becomes the one who opened the box. Though I'm not gonna lie, the first thing I thought when I saw Pandora was a Minecraft cosplay on a budget. Admittedly, I had a neutral opinion on Sophia for most of the game, just because I felt she was lacking any strong characterization or developed personality compared to the others, but all that was improved upon here. Hell, she even starts to sound a lot more human-like here. So at this point, I did start to like her, even if this moment did have some cheesy friendship stuff in it. Now getting Ichinose on side with Sophia's words,
After all, you're my very first friend.
the next few parts of my playthrough can be summed up as breezing through the Tokyo Tower jail, minus the Metatron fight, getting stuck for a couple of minutes inside the Ark because I didn't think to keep walking into the invisible wall after it seemingly not doing anything at first, and then did the last available request before sending the final calling card. Now it's the final battle against Emma, who is evolved into the false god Demiurge, who is just another Yaldabaoth when they already did that with Maruki, whilst having noticeable differences for him too. I know it's always Persona's thing to have a god as the final boss, but to beat the horse again, I wish it was something more original here. I mean, Demiurge is literally just another name for Yaldabaoth in Gnostic mythology. And I guess false god is right, because I found this fight quite easy given that most of her attacks have long tells and easy ways to dodge them. However, something that I really liked about this fight was how, in the second phase, everybody gets to play a part, which is something I wished a lot more RPGs and RPG-like games did gameplay-wise, as it makes the whole party feel valuable at the end, rather than some getting left out. So for me, I had Joker, Makoto, Sophia, and Zenkichi fight Demiurge for a mixture of story and skill reasons. Ryuji and Morgana fight the first set of stones because they work so well together. And An, Yusuke, and Haru take care of the other set. Once the stones were done, a bunch of Musou combos and SP management later, and the Phantom Thieves have now defeated a second god to grant humanity its free will back. Probably so they can forget about its importance again, since they clearly didn't learn the lesson the first time. With Emma gone for good, this hijacked road trip comes to a more peaceful end with a chugging competition, and everybody goes their separate ways again, newcomers included, to end off the game. I hope it didn't come across as overly negative on Strikers throughout this video, because that doesn't reflect my overall view of the game at all. I really liked this game and had tons of fun playing it. It just might be my favorite Musou game out of all the ones I've played. It certainly has the best story out of them, despite my criticisms of it, due to being a much bigger focus here, so it's far more developed and doesn't cop out what it was originally presented as. The only downside to this approach is that there isn't any multiplayer or way to add on more content to make me come back to it other than if I decide to replay it. There were plenty of things I really enjoyed and wanted to praise the game for, namely many of the fun interactions between the Phantom Thieves and cutscenes that carry over big parts of what I already love about them from the previous ones, but didn't have a way to really segue into them without it feeling very forced and tacked on. Like, my god, they gave Haru screen time. And Morgana is still insistent he's not a cat, or a raccoon, even though it was proven from his origin that he's been a cat since the very beginning. While the combat is the same as any other Musou game, it's still very fun in my opinion. All the party members have fun moves and abilities, every character has a combo that ends off with them attacking with their Persona skill while not consuming SP, which did help a bit with the SP management, and they were still able to incorporate genuine strategy elements as opposed to just being able to get away with brute forcing it the entire time. The newcomers are good additions too on all fronts, and the music is amazing as well, but that's par for the course for a Persona game. It's just, yet again, my one real criticism of the game is that the plot copied over a bunch of stuff from before, which gradually became more apparent as time went on, and how I go over parts of the plot to set the scene for how I reacted to certain things, it got brought up way more than what I'd say if I was in some casual conversation about the game as a whole. Whereas I would have preferred it if the story was completely original the whole way through, and only copied over the same themes and had more subtle parallels. But at the end of the day, I get more than enough enjoyment out of the characters that it isn't some deal-breaking issue for me. You could probably put them in everything like Atlas has already done, and as long as it doesn't ruin their characters, I'd probably still enjoy it. And that will most likely be the case for whatever spin-off game will inevitably come next until they make a Persona 6.
Until next time, Phantom Thieves!